So since I keep seeing people say, ICE is the modern slave patrol, ICE is the modern slave patrol, and it's fucking pissing me off, let's get to the truth. ICE is not the modern slave patrol. It's not at all, not even close. Because slave patrols from 1704 through 1865 were state-sanctioned militias, created explicitly to capture enslaved Africans and natives and suppress revolts. And those patrols did not evolve into immigration agencies, but into local and state police forces. You understand? Which historians trace through Reconstruction era posses. And black codes enforcements, and later Jim Crow policing. Meaning the true institutional descendant of slave patrols is the modern U.S. Police Department. Which still disproportionately targets black people. Through stop and frisk, the broken windows policing theory, and drug enforcement. The fake war on drugs started in 1971 and the 1994 crime bill. Producing racial disparities where black people are about 2.5 to 3 times more likely to be killed by police and 5 times more likely to be incarcerated, per the DOJ, the CDC, and the BJS. ICE, by contrast, was created in 2003 under the Homeland Security Act to enforce immigration law after 9/11. So while it participates in racialized control, it operates in a different lane of the same control system that moved from slave patrols to police to prisons to deportation regimes. Showing that the state didn't replace slave patrols with ICE, but layered ICE on top of a policing structure that already existed to discipline black labor and political threat. Per the 13th Amendment punishment clause and convict leasing and Jim Crow and mass incarceration. And non-black groups have historically attached themselves to black struggle only after black people forced legal victories. Because during Jim Crow there were no brown people. You understand? There were no brown racial category at all. America was legally black or white per Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. And Mexican Americans were classified as white in Ree Rodriguez, 1897, and Hernandez versus Texas, 1954. And they often sought inclusion on the white side of segregation rather than fighting to dismantle it. Part 2 on the way, hold on. Part 2 on how ICE isn't the modern slave patrol. Now let's get to it. As Brian Benkin documents, only pivoting to a constructed brown identity during the Chicano movement, after the success of the black civil rights movements, per the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. To access minority protections and affirmative action with groups like La Raza and MALDEF funded by the Ford Foundation. Convincing Congress in 1975 that Spanish language ballots were equivalent to Jim Crow poll taxes, despite Latinos never being a legally segregated caste, which flattened uniquely black institutions like slavery, redline, FHA 1934 maps, and the 13th Amendment loophole into generic people of color suffering, which it never was. Even in Mexico, black people were enslaved in Mexico, and black people freed black people in Mexico. You understand that? At the same time, the federal government repeatedly used proxy populations and intermediaries to destabilize black progress. From COINTELPRO 1956 to 1971, labeling black movements the FBI's greatest internal threat, and infiltrating the Panthers, SNCC, and MLK circle with informants of different ethnic backgrounds to post-1965 immigration policy per the Hart-Celler Act, expanding non-black labor pools during deindustrialization and redlining to weaken black worker leverage. So the pattern is not immigration functioning as the modern slave patrol, because as we stated, the police department is the modern slave patrol, but the state recycling racial categories and outsider groups to absorb black victories, dilute their political meaning, and convert targeted black remedies into universal programs that still leave black wealth at about 15% of white wealth, per the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, while claiming equality has been received. It's your boy.